Hi folks, Brent Bozell. Welcome to the Brent Bozell Show. Today I'm going to interview one of the true experts behind the scene when it comes to the subject of media bias. We're at the end of this very long campaign, and the media have played an extraordinary role. So I thought I would bring on Tim Graham, who's been my longtime colleague, who's the executive director of Newsbusters, which is the site which has the best commentary and the best documentation of the antics of the press. So the obvious question, Tim, we just came out with a study. Our colleague Rich Noyes came out with a study looking at the coverage of the campaign since the moment that Kamala Harris entered the race up until the present time. Fox News and others have called it the worst coverage in history. What's going on?
Well, first of all, the negative number is 85% negative against Trump. That's not, it's extraordinary, but it's not because the coverage of Trump's always been 90% negative, 92, 88. The extraordinary part is 78% positive coverage of Kamala Harris. Hillary Clinton should be so jealous. She got nothing like that. So there was a time when the ABC News coverage, right, when we were going into the debate, it was at 100% positive. They are being so ridiculously promotional. It's just extraordinary. Now, we should point out the way Rich does this is he always excludes the sound bites from the actual politicians. So Kamala attacking Trump isn't counting. Trump attacking Kamala isn't counted. But this is
just the media coverage.
The media and the experts they choose and the voters that they interview.
Mm-hmm. But you know what's remarkable on the Trump side? They could defend themselves, not definitively, but they could try. Throughout, when they were doing it throughout the campaign in 2016, throughout his administration, 2017 through 2021, by saying there were a lot of negative things. Mm-hmm. There were shenanigans in the campaign. He was impeached twice. There were all sorts of things that were coming back, and they were hitting him. Hey, we're just the press. We're just covering it. They could have said that. They could have said early on in this campaign, the guy spent most of his time in court. It's not going to be positive news that we're covering. Give them that mulligan as well. But since Kamala Harris came on, really the only noteworthy thing is that he got shot and almost got shot a second time.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no negativity. There are no scandals. There are no court trials. There's no impeachment. There's none of that. And yet it's still 85% negative.
Yeah, that was maybe the most extraordinary thing about Trump's numbers is that they didn't become more positive after he was shot. Mm-hmm. I mean, that just shows you how much they hate this guy. They have no objectivity. It obviously, these sorts of numbers demonstrate they're not trying to be objective at all. They really do see their role as making sure he loses. I mean, that's the only way that these numbers make any sense. But what's really interesting of the last period is that they're giving more coverage of Trump and a lot more coverage of Trump that's always about something he said, whether it's they're eating the dogs. Now, most recently, it was all about the comedian at his rally that said Puerto Rico is a floating island of garbage. And these stories go on for 3, 4, 5 days. There's only 5% of Kamala's coverage is about her personally or her scandals. They don't want to touch anything that's a scandal of hers. Jeff Dickens did this piece that showed they're not covering the charges that her husband brutally slapped a woman at the Cannes Film Festival before he married Kamala. They're not covering that she plagiarized her book in 2009. There's all these sorts of scandals about Kamala Harris that they're just not acknowledging exist. So that's how you get 78% positive coverage.
One of the, I saw the other day, or I guess last night, James Carville on CNN. I don't know if you caught it. That old curmudgeon made the declaration. He attacked the media for their coverage of Kamala Harris, saying it ought to have been 100% positive, and it ought to have been 100% negative on Trump. Why? He said. He pointed to the civil rights debates and the riots in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. And he said on the one side you had Dr. Martin Luther King, on the other side you had Bull Connor. And he asked, well, should that have been fair and objective? The answer is yes. It should have been. It should have been the new. If you're a reporter, you report. They should have reported the who, what, when, where, why. They should have shown it, and then let the public make a decision on what it was. Let the politicians take it from there. But a reporter's job is to simply tell the truth. But then I got to thinking, oh, wait a minute. Let's give James Carville the credit. Let's say, Jimmy boy, you're absolutely right. They should have covered it this way because Donald Trump is fraught with scandal and controversy. Okay, let me take you back to Joe Biden and the Joe Biden years, and Joe Biden bringing along his crackhead son on Air Force Two wherever he went, leaving behind with America's enemies like China these multi-million-dollar deals, putting him on the board of these companies in Ukraine with which he has absolutely no expertise, but getting paid fortunes of money, and then pushing the money through 21 LLCs, family-owned LLCs. There's only one reason only, for doing 21 LLCs, because you're hiding it, because you're hiding the paper trail. Okay, James Carville, if we're going to apply your rules, then Joe Biden should never have been president. Where am I wrong?
Oh, their coverage should have been 100% negative. Look, we all know the way they treated that. They were like, Tony Bobulinski said, we had 10% for the big guy. Who's the big guy? They never answered the question. Joe Biden was never forced to answer the question. They're like, that's not an issue. And this has been actually one of the interesting stories, is that we all know that the January 6th committee got oodles and thousands of hours of live coverage. And when the Republicans have a hearing into the Bidens, nothing. Yeah. And that's, again, the whole imbalance you see. So, yeah, it's not just the tone of coverage, it's what they decide to cover. We're always talking about just the remarkable bias by omission.
How about investigation? How about investigative journalism? Good God, everything about Donald Trump has been investigated up one side and the other. Everything about Bush, everything about Reagan was investigated up one side and down the other. If you look at the coverage, starting with Bill Clinton, and we did that back in the 90s, we analyzed how they were doing that, where they just decided we're not going to investigate Bill Clinton and all the scandals revolving around him. Barack Obama, he had tons of scandals revolving around him, around Hillary Clinton, around those bleached computers, by the way, a felony, about the IRS scandal and those destroyed computers, by the way, a felony. No investigation into it. No investigation into Biden. You're given a laptop, which they first dismissed as not being true. Then they might have admitted, but they weren't going to investigate it. 2 years after the election, here comes the New York Post or the New York Times. Yeah, I guess we should have covered it. Here comes Washington Post. Yeah, I guess we should have covered it. Here comes Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah, we didn't do it. I blamed the Justice Department for it. They didn't cover it. They could have investigated. Okay, the big guy is not Joe Biden. He's just not Joe Biden. Then who is he?
Yeah, who? I'd like to know. I always love to tell this story about how the New York Times acknowledged the Hunter Biden laptop was real on page A20 in paragraph 23.
Yes. How much after? I think it was a year and a half after the election or something like that?
Yeah, it was in both newspapers were in 2022. Yeah. It took them that long. Now, remember, when the Access Hollywood tape came out from Donald Trump, the Washington Post took precisely 2.5 hours to confirm its veracity. I'm not even joking. They did it in an afternoon. And this one, they were like, oh, no, I'm sorry, 2 years.
Go back to the Rathergate scandal. This was clearly an effort by CBS to undermine George Bush's re-election campaign. Clearly, it was the October surprise that they dropped on. I was very proud of Rob Louie,
Yes.
who today heads up the Daily Signal with the Heritage Foundation, who broke the story that this was a fraud. Now, he did it in, I believe, in about 3 hours or 2 hours. He blew that story to pieces. It only took 2 or 3 hours asking the right questions. So if CBS truly were interested in real journalism, in honest journalism, they could have fact-checked their story, and in about 2 or 3 hours, they would have realized Dan Rather was lying through his teeth. Mary Mapes, his producer, was lying through her teeth, that this was a setup to get George Bush. That story never would have seen the light of day if they fact-checked it. The double standard is astonishing.
Yeah, this is where I always laugh. People always forget that was on 60 Minutes, too. 60 Minutes. And now we'll fast forward to Leslie Stahl with Donald Trump saying, we can't do the Hunter Biden laptop. We can't verify whether that's true or not. Well, you didn't verify that. Rob, I think he discovered that the text in the so-called reports was from a computer. Well, obviously, they didn't have a computer in the 1960s that was sending letters. They had old typewriters. They weren't even electric typewriters.
You took one look at it, you look at the piece of paper, and you say, that's not typewritten. This is 1971. The next thing you do is you contact the 3 top typography experts in the country.
Yeah.
And you show this to them, and you ask them, is this real or not? And they all said, no, it didn't exist in 1971. That's all it took to show that this whole story was a fraud.
Yeah, and so it continues today. I mean, we're still dealing, obviously, with the 60 Minutes Kamala interview, where they're still not showing anybody the transcript, and so it's still a show that seems more devoted to getting Democrats elected than actually doing journalism. I mean, that's really the whole problem we have all over the place. And then it's even worse now. We have a new study today that the late night comedy shows, their jokes about Trump and Harris. It's 98% about Trump and 2% about Harris, which, we're not surprised because these people all fiercely hate Trump. Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers. But it just, again, makes you realize everywhere you go on ABC, CBS, and NBC, the news shows, the comedy shows, The View, and we studied that too. I mean, they're all remarkably Democratic Party spin machines.
I think that in a very real way, they've overdone it. Hollywood always has been left-wing. We know that. You go back to Ronald Reagan and things that were said. However, you also had Johnny Carson during the Reagan years, and he was not. He was the outlier, but he was not. Steve Allen, his predecessor, was a left-winger. Johnny Carson wasn't. But even when you had a spin that was clearly pro-Clinton during the Clinton years, they could still throw in the Monica Lewinsky joke here and there. Even though they loved the Kennedy family, they still had a couple of Kennedy jabs about drinking after 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They were capable of doing that. They are incapable of doing that with the left today. But secondly, with Donald Trump, I think that so much of what they say just isn't funny. They're beating a dead horse on this. And they've been saying it so often. There's a reason why Greg Gutfeld is now #1 late night, which is something that was unthinkable. You never thought, Tim. You and I have covered this forever. We've seen the numbers forever. You never imagined that there would come a day that a cable late night show would beat all of the broadcast late night shows, the Tonight Show. And it did, and it has, and I think I think Greg Gutfeld, he's conservative and just the opposite, but they're funny, and they're the only ones as opposed to everybody else that's doing the same thing.
Yeah, and you have these comedians. Jimmy Kimmel he said it out loud. He's like, if you're a Republican, I don't want you watching my show. I mean, Johnny Carson was actually pitched at the entire American people.
Right.
And there were less choices, right? We had more traditional 3 networks of TV. But, these hosts are very clearly telling people, unless you're coming for the vicious anti-Trump jokes, don't bother.
And Johnny Carson could have, 30, 40 million people watching him. Got what do these guys have late night? Two.
Yeah,
three,
it's not the same.
And the ones that are watching them are the anti-Trumpers and the never-Trumpers. They're the ones who are watching that. The rest of the country wants nothing to do with these people. But let me switch this. Let me ask you this question. We've been looking at this too, and we took a survey of this. Do you think? And I'm going to show, if you say yes, I'm going to show you why it's no.
Oh.
If you say no, I'm going to show you why you're right. Do you think Kamala Harris's supporters know who she is?
I'm guessing no. They keep talking about how they still are reintroducing her to the country.
Yeah. I find it remarkable that she is so callously playing the moderate game. She's so callously just lying, frankly, just lying. And I'm not saying this as a conservative person. I'm not saying this as a Trump supporter. I'm just saying it objectively. When she takes the position that she's against fracking, she has spent her entire professional career being in favor of fracking. And here's another thing that's interesting. How can you be, and I don't think no one in the press has asked this question, how can you be against fracking and be a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, which calls for an end to fracking?
Right.
You can't do both.
Yeah.
You can't be both. And also the record shows, and it is clearly on the record, on camera, her voice, her just saying proudly she wants to end fracking. The callous, cynical view about the border, where this administration, Mayorkas, Biden, all of them, deliberately, Tim, allowed 10, 20, we don't even know the number of how many millions have come across the border. They allowed it. They wanted it to happen. They made no effort to stop it. And now, suddenly, she's Miss Law and Order.
She's built the wall now.
Yeah, build a wall. So on tax cuts, that's another one that she's in favor of tax cuts. This woman would tax everyone to death. Now, we know that for a fact. She's doing that because she knows her agenda won't win. Okay, this is what politicians do. If I were advising her campaign, it's exactly what I would tell her to do. You got to moderate your image. You got to project something else. When you win, let's go back to the old way. The media's job is to expose that. That's the job of journalism, to say, today she took a position against fracking. She has had a long record as the co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, calling for the end of fracking. That was the job of journalism. So I have no problem. Of course, I have an ethical problem, a moral problem, but not a political problem with her being a liar, because that's what politicians do.
Yeah.
But my God, the media have no excuse.
There's been some, Dina Bash, when she interviewed Harrison Walz, at least went there for a minute, but they all have this habit of being like, well, but you took this stand this, and then you took this stand now, and they let her answer, and then they go to the next question. There's been a little bit where Norah O'Donnell was interviewing her on Sunday, and it was like, when is an abortion limit okay? And she's like, I'm for reinstalling Roe versus Wade. And she doesn't really push her. She did ask several times, like, but where's the exception? Where's the limit? So that's a great question, but they don't really take it to the end. And they certainly don't take it in a way, the way that they'd go after J.D. Vance on Sundays. They don't just simply say, there's not one restriction you favor. Like, they attack first and let her respond to the attack. Nobody does that to Harris or Walz. And that's just, as you say, we have a very one-sided system. And, I think of the media now, Brent, and I think about the interview that Howard Stern did with Kamala Harris, which was similar to the way Drew Barrymore felt about her interview with Kamala Harris, where they come at this thing, Howard Stern, we know who Howard Stern was, now saying, I don't like it when Saturday Night Live does skits about you. This is too important. You shall not be mocked. This is probably why only 2% of the jokes are about her, is that they all think that this is so important that it's the end of democracy or the saving of democracy, that you can't say a negative thing about her at all.
Yep. Now, and based on that, to go through the polling numbers that we took, and we've talked about it, but they've got to be repeated because everyone needs to understand just how important this is. Let's go back to James Carville. With James Carville saying it should have been 100% a positive coverage, basically there should be nothing negative about him. With that idea in mind, James Carville would approve of what I'm going to say. And it's a national poll. We polled her supporters to see how much they knew about her. We asked, did they know that she supported cutting funding for the police? 71% of her own supporters didn't know that. If they did, they might not be supporting her. And that would go against the James Carville narrative. Ergo, this is okay. We asked if they knew that she was like a sponsor of the Green New Deal. Why is that important? For the reason I said. It would show that she's lying about fracking. Or if she's telling the truth about fracking, that she has kneecapped the Green New Deal. It's one or the other. 73% of her own supporters don't know that because the media haven't covered it. And to James Carville, that's a good thing. We asked if they knew that she wants to eliminate all private health insurance. And to hear the videotape of her saying this really does send shivers up your spine when she smiles and says, well, I just think that the government can do it better. Isn't this a nice thing? Mm-hmm. How many of her own supporters know that? 81% of her own supporters don't know that. What would they think if they knew that President Harris was going to take away all private health insurance? We asked, did they know that she supported reparation payments to atone for slavery? Again, James Carville doesn't want people to know that because that might hurt Kamala Harris. So he doesn't want the media to cover that. 71% of her supporters don't know. Good job. We asked if they knew that since being named the border czar, Harris had never gone to a conflict zone on the border. The border czar, and never done that. 72% of her supporters, over 70%. We asked if they knew she was the most liberal senator in America in 2019.
Worse than Bernie Sanders.
A self-proclaimed socialist.
Yeah.
I mean, this puts you in the Marxist camp. 3 out of 4, 75% of her own supporters didn't know that. What if they had known that she was, look how well Bernie Sanders was doing out there. So how well would she have done out there?
Well, Liz Cheney's still for her, Brent.
Isn't that something? And all the people in the Trump administration who worked for him and then had personal falling outs with him, who have now endorsed her. Shame on them.
Yeah.
Shame on the Bushes. Shame on the Cheneys. When you look at this, when you look at her agenda, they're endorsing this agenda.
That's right.
What does this say about them? Oh, I'm not done. I'm not done. What if her supporters knew that she has supported decriminalizing the border? Meaning anybody who wants to. Oh, she's now changed her mind on this one too.
Yeah.
But this has been her record. There should be no crime. In other words, open borders. James Carville does not want Democrats to know that because that's going to hurt.
Yeah.
74% of her supporters don't know that because the media, dutifully, have not covered it. We all know this as conservatives, that she started a fund to bail out the rioters, the BLM rioters in 2020. Every conservative knows that. 78% of her supporters don't know that.
Even though her running mates from Minnesota and was neglected the riots.
Yes.
They are in his town.
So he's another one. I mean, my favorite was the questionnaire with the ACLU in 2019, where she proactively put this forward. They didn't go to her and say, will you take this position? She proactively put it forward that she would legalize all drugs in America. That means heroin on the streets,
fentanyl,
legal. Fentanyl that is killing Americans all over the country. All you need to do is walk on any city street, go to San Francisco, and see what fentanyl has done to her city. Go to any major city and look at the human catastrophe. She says legalize it. Crack. Look at the crack. Legalize it. My guess is, we don't have a number for that one because that hasn't been tested. My guess is 95% of her supporters. What if they didn't know? Now, James Carville, who says, by God, it should be 100% positive because Donald Trump is a monster, he's in favor of keeping this. What does this say? What does it say to you, Tim? And this is going to be one, I want to get your opinion on this. What does this say about democracy? If the public has the information necessary to make an educated decision on a campaign unavailable?
I love this question because, one of the things I always love to say is they think that criticizing the media is anti-democracy. And it's like what we are trying to do at the Media Research Center is trying to bring democracy to the media. We're trying to say, here's where they're letting the electorate down by keeping them, you could argue they're keeping them uneducated, and they're demonizing the Fox News, Newsmax, all the conservative websites that are putting out these stories, who are telling you about her, all the radical stances she took in 2019. Carville, you mentioned Carville. Carville hates all this woke stuff, all the DEI stuff. He's tried to tell them internally, guys, you're not going to win with that. Well, this has not been an issue the news media want to focus on, except they get very upset when you call her the DEI candidate or a DEI hire, which obviously, in a sense, what we've seen in the study Rich did was there's so much positive coverage of her, which is positive because why? It's not about her policies. It's about she's a woman. Wouldn't it be great to have a female president? And it's like, why? If we're just going to get Joe Biden too, why would everybody say, but it's a female causing hyperinflation now?
You get Obama 3. I'm struck by this, that every Democrat in the 21st century running for president is on the record now calling for censorship. This is something that once upon a time was an unheard of proposition for the Democratic Party. Unheard of. They were just the opposite. They wanted free speech for any old thing. Now, whether it's Barack Obama, whether it's Hillary Clinton, whether it's Joe Biden, whether it's Kamala Harris, they are all openly challenging not just the Second Amendment, they're now going after the First Amendment. And now that's the cornerstone. You can't have a functioning democracy without the First Amendment. They're all questioning it. Media people are questioning it. Members of Congress are questioning it. The deep state is questioning. Do we really want to have the freedom of speech? Because those conservatives are dangerous, dangerous people. I can't get this thought out of my mind. 25 years after man landed on the moon, the Chinese didn't know. The Chinese people didn't know because there had been such a cone of silence placed on them by the government that did not want them to know the Americans had been so far ahead of them technologically. I see that. I see that as at least a desire of the far left. That's what they want. They don't want you to ever learn the numbers I gave you about Kamala Harris. So long as she's president or running for re-election 4 years from now, they don't want anyone to know this. They want that cone of silence. They wanted that cone of silence on Hunter Biden. They wanted that cone of silence on Benghazi and Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
They want those cones of silence. And my fear is, Tim, and let's make this the last question. I want to ask you this. Do you think they're getting comfortable?
No, I think that they're beginning to really panic now. So Axios had this story the other day about, is it the end of the big media? Voters under 35 don't watch the networks. Well, okay. Voters now get it in so many different ways in streaming and whatsoever. I think they've done all this coverage that's so 78% positive for Kamala, and this is still tight. It's still tied. They've got to be furious it's still tied. All the Democrats are like, why is this tied? We're tied with Hitler. You know that they're all panicking. But what you're suggesting is, yes, social media has opened up conservatives being able to speak and conservatives being able to spread journalism that they don't want done. And so that's where all of these people now are saying, no, we want to say everything the conservatives are saying and reporting is disinformation, therefore it has to be shut down. But we know China, we talk about China, the lab leak, that now they acknowledge is real. The Hunter Biden laptop, which they all said before the election was disinformation, turned out to be real. And that's where the whole censorship thing is so awful because, yes, you will never know who the big guy is, you know. So as you suggest, we deserve answers.
You and I predicted this. Maybe you don't even remember. When we co-wrote Weapons of Mass Distortion, when was that?
That was yours.
No.
That was 2003.
No, what am I thinking about? The first one we wrote together.
Whitewash.
Was it white? Whichever one it was.
Yeah, well, there's been a few.
We predicted that because Rush Limbaugh and I talked about this at length on one of his shows, that I saw the future for the media in the sense that the more they were exposed and the more the people came to understand and disbelieve them, that they were going to behave like cornered rats. When you're a rat in a corner, you instinctively lunge for the person's jugular. And I saw that happening. He asked me, do you think they'll ever change their ways? And I said, no, they're going to do just this. They're going to go just the opposite direction. They're going to go for the jugular of the conservative movement. And that's exactly what's happening now. They're going for the jugular. They're trying to shut down and bleed the conservative movement to death. Thank you, Tim. You've been just a champion of the MRC. I get all the credit, which is very good. No, you've done a magnificent job for us. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.